Today I decided to do something a little weird. I thought it would be fun to try and collect as much as possible of one single resource in the span of 100 Minecraft days. And what better thing is there to collect than some delicious potatoes? So in this video I will be putting all my efforts and resources into farming as many potatoes as possible over the next 100 days. Why? Because, well, why not? Okay, so let's start. Okay, so here we are in a completely new world. Let's just start with the basic things. Collect wood and collect some stone and collect, just get some basic tools first. And then I think my best bet is actually going to be to try and find a village. Because in a village I'll be able to find potatoes, which is going to be the most important thing of this challenge. Also, villagers. Villagers are going to be, very useful because they can actually do all the work for me. But first I need some basic tools and some food too. After crafting some basic tools, I needed some food. So I am so sorry for what I'm about to do to these innocent animals. There we go, okay. After slaying the local wildlife, I began looking for a village, and after running around for a while, this happened. There's a village. Perfect. Yes, okay. Good. Let's go over there. I made my way to the village and discovered it had generated on an island, which I thought was pretty cool. I then checked if there were any potatoes in the village farm. Okay, so do you have any potatoes here? That's a carrot. That's a potato. Okay, perfect. You have potatoes, so we can start farming. Yes, perfect. Now I had everything I needed to start farming. I settled down in one of the houses and after mining for a while, I upgraded my tools, extended the farm and then planted my first potatoes. Okay, now let's plant our first potatoes. There we go. Okay, so now I actually have my first potatoes planted, which is great. So yeah, but now it's pretty dark and I just need to wait for the potatoes to grow. So what better thing to do than to go mining a little bit, maybe find some diamonds or iron, stuff like that. I need some more resources to actually be able to grow even more potatoes. So yeah, let's do that now. So I descended into the mines in hopes of finding more resources. I mined for some time and eventually found a cave where this happened. Hey, diamonds. Nice. Thank you. I later found even more diamonds and now my pickaxe was almost broken, so I had to find a way out of the cave, which took some time. When I got home, I bone mealed the potatoes, explored these nearby underwater ruins, and when night came, I began lighting up the island. I also found a zombie villager that I decided to trap in this boat for safekeeping. Now it was time to build an iron farm, because the farms I'm planning to build will require a lot of hoppers which I crafted using iron. So I began collecting everything I would need, including a zombie, and after a few days the farm was up and running. Infinite iron, done. I then trapped the rest of the villagers in this cobblestone prison since I really didn't want to lose them because they would be really important later. I then took a good look at my farm and realized that it was still way too small. So I began expanding it by flattening out the area. Now things were starting to look good. I just needed to wait for the potatoes to grow in order to be able to plant even more. So while I waited, I decided to explore a massive cave system where I found even more diamonds and other resources. I also made sure to grab some obsidian for a portal and an enchanting table. Back home, I noticed that a lot of the potatoes were fully grown, which meant that it was time to harvest and expand the farm even more. The farm was getting absolutely massive, and I had also made my first profits, a total of 716 potatoes. But I was just getting started, and I also realized that I was going to need some help growing the crops. But how? Well, the answer is bees. As you know, bees can pollinate crops and make them grow faster. So I traveled to a nearby forest where I found 2 bees that I lured to my base. But there was one problem. I didn't have any honeycombs to craft beehives with, so I decided to try and get a bee nest to generate with a tree. But little did I know that apparently bee nests can only generate with a tree if the sapling is close to a flower. And since there were no flowers near the saplings I was planting, it meant that this was not going to work. I pretty quickly realized this, so I just gave up trying to get a bee nest and decided to expand the farm instead. Later on, I crafted bookshelves and checked on the iron farm and whoa. it was producing an insane amount of iron. With all this iron, I could finally begin planning the automatic farm. So I began smelting stone to smooth stone because I didn't want the farm to look too ugly. But before building the farm, I had to harvest the potatoes since the crops were pretty much fully grown again. So I began harvesting. This literally took an entire day. But it was worth the effort, because now the amount of potatoes had risen to over 5,000. But I was still farming everything manually, so now it was time to start automating things. So I grabbed the stone and the hoppers and then began building. And if you're wondering how this farm works, well, let me explain. The farm is divided into two sides. There are farmer villagers on both sides and both of them farm potatoes. When the villagers are ready to breed, they will try to throw food to each other, but this fence will block that, causing the potatoes to fall into the hoppers below, which then lead into this chest. Now the first layer of the farm was done, and the only thing left to do was to move 2 villagers to it. Now I had finally a passive income of potatoes. I then checked on the manual potato farm and noticed that it was soon time to harvest everything again. But before that I needed a fortune 3 hoe, because as you might know, if you harvest crops using a fortune hoe, you will get a lot more. So I crafted the last bookshelves I needed in order to be able to get 30 level enchantments, and then I did the unthinkable. I crafted a diamond hoe. I then enchanted it hoping to get fortune, but had no luck. I then enchanted some of my other tools, and in order to make them unbreakable, I needed to get mending. Luckily, I had a zombie villager that I could cure in order to get really cheap mending, but this also meant that I had to go to the nether and find a fortress. So I built a portal and stepped into the nether. I ran around the nether for quite some time, but had no luck finding a fortress, so I just gave up on finding one. But hey, at least I got some bone meal and XP. But I still needed to get mending somehow, so I gave jobs to all of the villagers and bought some emeralds. But before acquiring mending, it was once again time to harvest all the crops and replant everything. And only after I had already harvested everything, I noticed that I had forgotten something very important, using a fortune hoe that I mentioned earlier. So immediately after remembering this, I enchanted the hoe again, and finally got fortune 3 on it. Now I just needed to get mending so I wouldn't have to worry about accidentally breaking the hoe. So I refreshed this villager a few times and I eventually got it to sell mending. It was not very cheap, but I bought it anyway and then put it on the hoe. At this point, the potatoes were still growing, so I didn't want to waste any time. So I began working on a second floor for the automatic farm. Sometime later, it was once again time to harvest, and this time I was going to use the fortune 3 hoe, so now I would be getting the maximum amount possible. After everything was harvested, it was already day 31, and so far I had collected a little over 20,000 potatoes, which was pretty good, but I knew I could do even better. So I finished building the second floor for the automatic farm and also checked how well it was producing, and well, it's not that much yet, but remember that this was produced by only 2 villagers and I was planning on expanding the automatic farm a lot more. But for that I would need more villagers, so I gave some food and beds to the villagers, and now I just needed to wait for them to breed. And while I waited, I expanded the manual farm even more. But there was still one thing missing, the bees that I mentioned earlier. So I set out to explore the nearby forest again, and this time I finally found a beehive. I then stole the honey from it, and once I was back home, I crafted a beehive and gave the 2 bees a new home. I then continued expanding the manual farm a bit more, which caused my hoe to take heavy damage. So I went to the nether to repair it. And then it was that time again. Time to harvest all the crops, of course. After that was out of the way, I placed down flowers for the bees around the farm and then went to check on the villagers in case they had any babies. But no. For some reason, they just didn't want to breed. So I tried fixing that by giving them more space and disabling the iron farm, but nope, it did not help. I then thought that maybe they just want some privacy, so I separated 2 of the villagers from the rest, and that seems to have worked. I then moved the new villager to the automatic farm, and while I waited for another one to appear, I continued construction on the automatic farm. I also needed more bees, so after stealing their honey, I crafted more beehives, but before I placed them down, I had to harvest the potatoes again. Another 30 minutes later of non-stop farming, I calculated how many potatoes I had collected so far, and whoa, it was a lot. 43,236 to be exact. Now, I was sure that I could reach at least 100,000, but in order for that to be possible, I had to put more villagers to work in the automatic farm. So that's exactly what I did. I then bred the bees and placed down even more beehives around the farm. At this point, things were honestly getting a bit stressful. There were so many things to keep track of, and there was not a single moment when I didn't have anything to do. I was either harvesting crops, breeding bees, checking on the villagers, or expanding the automatic farm. It felt a bit like multitasking. And then, after many days of non-stop work, I had finally reached day 50, with over 50,000 potatoes farmed so far. But I could not stop now, so with no time wasted, straight back to work I went. After a few days, I ran out of coal, so I had to go mining for more. It was supposed to be a quick visit underground, but it accidentally turned into a long mining trip. But the time spent underground was well worth it, because I found some absolutely massive caves with diamonds everywhere. But then my shield broke, which made mining too risky to continue, so I decided to go home with everything I had collected. And that's where I crafted a full set of diamond armor. After that, I immediately went back to working on the automatic farm, and I also got tired of smelting stone for it, so I just continued building it using cobblestone. Come on, I'm here to farm potatoes, not to win a building contest. But I ran into a problem. I had no villagers for the farm, so on day 61 I did something I should have done ages ago. I built a proper villager breeder, or at least something that looks like one. But there was another problem. I didn't have any villagers for a breeder either, so while I waited for more villagers to appear, I decided to give my hoe a little upgrade. Netherite hoe done. After that, I finally got enough villagers for the breeder and then started the construction of a second automatic farm. A while later, it was time to harvest again. So right now I am harvesting everything, as you can see. So I'm just gonna harvest everything and replant, and then when I'm done, I'm gonna count all the potatoes, so we will get an idea of how many potatoes I have farmed so far. So I'll be back when I have harvested everything. So yeah, see you then. I then calculated the exact amount of potatoes. 3 times 64 plus how many? Plus 7. Okay, and then plus the total amount. So far it's day 20. It's day 67, and so far I have farmed a total amount of 98,695 potatoes. That's in these chests. That's how many I have farmed so far, which is, I mean, it's quite a lot actually. I was actually not expecting it to be so many, but there is still a lot of time left. It's only day 67, so I have more than enough time to increase the number, and so yeah, we will see exactly how many I have on day 100. So yeah, let's get to work again. I later discovered that I had missed 2 stacks of potatoes, so by adding them to the total, the amount of potatoes farmed so far is 98,823. I was getting really close to 100,000 now, so I went straight back to work. It was now day 71, and after a successful harvest, I calculated the amount of potatoes to be 111,426. But wait, there's more, because I forgot to include the potatoes produced by the automatic farms. So after collecting them, the total amount this far is 112,355. In 71 days, I had reached my goal of 100,000, but this also meant that I still had plenty of time left to farm even more potatoes. So that's exactly what I did next. The numbers were just rising, but not fast enough for my liking. So while I was working on the automatic farms, I decided to put beehives into them as well, to hopefully make them even more efficient. And while I was harvesting the crops again, I made sure to breed the bees in order to have as many as possible of them. At this point into the challenge, things were getting kinda repetitive, and the video would just get too boring if I showed you everything I did, so let's just skip like 10 days and see where we are at then. Oh. Apparently, I have farmed over 150,000 potatoes so far. Well, you know what that means? I had to get to 200,000 now. So I got straight back to work. Except that I didn't, because I noticed something was wrong with the automatic farms. For some strange reason, the villagers were losing their jobs. This was bad. I immediately began investigating and I pretty quickly found a problem. Apparently, the block that I had placed above every workstation in the automatic farm was somehow messing with the villagers' pathfinding or something like that. Anyway, this caused some of the villagers to lose their professions. Luckily, it was an easy fix, but it would have been nice to notice this a bit earlier because I probably missed out on a lot of potatoes because of this. But at this point, I just had to deal with it and continue on working. The days just flew by and before I knew it, I had finished a successful harvest on day 91, but this time I decided not to count the potatoes because at this point I was really close to 100 days and I wanted to surprise myself with the grand total on day 100. But I still had a few days left and it was really important not to waste any time. So I finished constructing the top floor in the second automatic farm and then took a moment to appreciate everything I had accomplished so far. I then harvested the fully grown farm for the last time, and then spent the last 3 days harvesting fully grown crops individually until the sun rose above the horizon for the 100th time. It was finally day 100, and all I had to do now was to collect all the crops and the potatoes from the automatic farms. And then it was time for the big reveal. It was time to find out if all this time and effort had been worth it. I carefully calculated everything, and to my surprise, I had reached my goal of 200,000. In the end, the grand total was 219,548 potatoes. Well, was it worth spending over 30 hours literally doing nothing else than farming potatoes? Well, no. This was the most boring thing ever, like seriously, do not do this.